Hey guys, Alex here. Welcome to episode 173 of the Trademate Sports Betting Podcast. Today I'm joined by pro sports bettor, my old mate Neel Shah. How are you, mate?
Yeah, really good, mate. Yeah, just busy, cracking away. How about yourself, man?
No, very good, mate. It's good to have you back on. We've this podcast we are doing today is one that we have. I think we've even started recording at least once. We've scheduled it in maybe 5 times before that. So this is 1 months in the waiting. I would assume we were ready to do this about 6 months ago.
Yeah, it's been so long. We just had to try and remember what I'd actually read. But yeah,
Yeah.
we'll see. Or will it be worth the hype? That's the question.
Yeah, it'll probably. I mean, yeah, we probably got all the signs in the world to just not do it, and now we're just going to make fools out of ourselves and go against what should have been done and just given up. But hopefully, there'll be something valuable in here for the listeners today, mate. We are gonna. I guess I don't really think we're going to do a book review, but it's all kind of based on a book that we've both read recently, Superforecasting, The Art and Science of Prediction by Dan Gardner and Philip Tetlock. I think this came out maybe 2016 or something, so we're a bit late to the party, but never mind. It's probably at least the best book I've ever read in terms of improving my sports betting or handicapping. And I think there's just multiple topics in here. Smartest thing I did was I never really do this when I'm reading books, but just taking notes as I went along, making marks of some quotes and stuff that I found really intriguing. And I was able to, I guess, go back and read it once again. And it really helped me with my handicapping over the last 6 months or however long it's been since I finished the book. And yeah, I just think there's lots of topics for us to discuss here, mate. So yeah, not really a book review, but more so just like discussing and how something like this can relate to sports betting. Brief introduction to the book. It's all kind of about a project that they did. These guys called the Good Judgment Project. Essentially, what they did was they got thousands of forecasters around the world, people that just forecast global events every day, no matter what their experience levels were, no matter how famous they were, and then over a period of years, these guys forecasted every day multiple events, which equaled to thousands and thousands of events over the course of a couple of years. And they made their predictions percentage wise on what sort of outcomes certain global events were gonna happen. And yeah, I guess it was just a massive study, and they highlighted in their book the results of the studies. What forecasters were successful, which were not, why, etc., etc. And I think, although it has nothing to do with sports betting, forecasting global events, I think there were some really valuable lessons for sports bettors and how much it relates to, us forecasting sports games, odds, all that kind of stuff. So let's get started, mate. I think one of the first things they talk about was, I guess, pundits, or what we would call sports betting pundits. What they would call, I guess, whatever pundits or forecasters that are on TV, the most popular ones. So I'm not sure who the most popular forecaster in the world is in terms of getting time on television, but I guess you could say like a Gary Neville of the EPL, Jamie Carragher, these kind of guys, and how I guess the most interesting thing they found from the study was the more famous an expert was in their study, the more famous the forecaster was, the less accurate he or she was in their predictions over the course of a few years, which is just fascinating and kind of shows people that I think it just shows that, like, if the more famous you are, the less, I don't know, the probably less work you're going to do, maybe the less research you're going to do on a certain topic, because if you're famous, you think your opinion is probably, it's undefeated. It's the best in the business. And I think you do see that a lot with the likes of Gary Neville. A lot of the time I listen to him and I'm quite bewildered by some of the stuff he's saying, especially when it comes to Arsenal. But what did you kind of think of, that side of things, and how it's kind of interesting that the more, I think it's just fascinating, the more famous you are, the less likely, the less accurate you were in your predictions.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I maybe a bit harsh on Gary Neville in particular. I think actually he's an improvement over what was before, which very much kind of relates to what you're saying. So, like, it was let's say on Sky Sports in the UK, there used to be sort of Andy Gray and Richard Keys. Some people might remember, who, funnily enough, sort of are in Doha now. They lived like around the corner from me. But the kind of the level of analysis and detail sort of now, I think, has raised, but still, you do have a lot of pundits on TV, and they're kind of slowly being phased out because I think the audience is kind of demanding a bit more. Kind of analytics are more in the game, but so traditionally, yeah, absolutely what you're saying. So someone like, for example, Mark Lawrenson used to be a great player for Liverpool. Multiple sort of European Cup winner, sort of a fixture on the BBC for a long time, and I think he's kind of been phased out now. But there was a kind of legendary prediction game where, again, every week he would sort of predict the results for everyone. And I think someone went back and looked at, I think he predicted Liverpool to win like 90% or something ridiculous, like 80 or 90% of every single game they played.
Sounds
and
like
if you
Marius.
yeah, and if you basically sort of laid his selections, like the whole time, you'd be a sort of millionaire by now. But it is indicative of, again, the more, I suppose, someone's perceived as an expert for, particularly, let's say, in sports. So an expert in playing the game doesn't necessarily make you an expert in kind of reading where a betting line should be. There's far more to it. So again, predicting one team is going to win over the other, like we've discussed many times, like it's not about necessarily sort of predicting X over Y. It's about the price for X should be this, and the price for Y should be this, and getting value each time. So I think that's absolutely a point. But you see it across so many domains where, I think there is an element of complacency. If you've been doing something for a long time, your thoughts are kind of rigid. So that's something we kind of come on to later. I think one of the points in the notes we've made about open-mindedness, you tend to get complacent. You tend to have these kind of established tropes and ideas. Going back to the World Cup, this happened with the USA. Just to give another example, is that a lot of people were surprised that they held England to a draw, that they played well and they got out of their group. I think there were a lot of kind of biases, especially in the English media, about the US. Again, kind of not being a great team. Paul talked about it, I think, on the podcast, was kind of quite enjoyed kind of rubbing all the sort of English media's faces in it, because it was, again, sort of lazy research, because in a lot of the time on TV, it's kind of the way it's consumed. People aren't looking for that kind of higher level of information, and you can kind of get away with it. But the book, there's lots of examples, especially from like military intelligence. Different examples. There was an example from sort of Zero Dark 30 as well, about trying to find Bin Laden, about sort of predicting how that might happen. The likelihood of finding him based on the information they have. And again, sports is not necessarily a matter of life and death, but with something like military intelligence, it's extremely important to get some degree of accuracy. So I think that's where the book illustrates why it's important to really consider that, how you're getting this information, how you're using this information, and how to kind of improve that accuracy. So absolutely, it's definitely sort of in the domain of sports pundits. Even meteorology, which the book talks about, again, sort of predicting the weather. there was a famous incident in the 1980s in the UK. Someone called Michael Fish, who was again a weatherman, and basically said, be kind of calm. Might be some kind of light winds today. No problem. And it was like one of the worst storms in in British history that day. It's kind of gone down infamously. Not necessarily, it's not necessarily him, but the data that was provided to him, was inaccurate. Again, that was his prediction, which was kind of famously wrong. So there are lots of domains where that absolutely is the case.
Yeah, and if you ask yourself the question, like, why is a pundit, let's just say, why are they the one why are they famous? Why are they the one that gets the big job on Sky Sports? And it's not really because of their ability to predict or bet on a game. It's really because they're engaging and they're interesting to listen to. I mean, I don't really respect much of anything that Gary Neville says on Arsenal because I know there are much more better people to listen to, but I still listen to him because he's entertaining. Like he's a very, very, very good talker. He puts his words together brilliantly, and he's engaging, he's controversial, and if you're a producer, you're not going to hire the best, let's just say, best ever footballer ever, Lionel Messi. You're not going to put Lionel Messi on the broadcast because, I mean, obviously he's not going to speak the greatest English, but let's just say he spoke fluent English. Let's just say Cristiano Ronaldo. You're going to listen more to someone who's engaging. Ronaldo might not be that engaging. At least, he's got probably a better football mind overall because he's one of the greatest ever. But it's kind of all about just engaging an audience and being interesting. And you'll never ever hear a pundit say something like Manchester United are a 68% chance of winning this game. Like, that is just nothing you would ever hear. But these are kind of the percentages, odds that sports bettors need to be working with, because the edges in the Premier League are minuscule. We're talking about, three, if you have an edge, probably like 2-3%, something like that on a 1x2 market. So if you're not dealing with percentages like that, then you're probably not going to be profitable in the long term. So yeah, I think just keep in mind for everyone that, like, sports pundits are not sports bettors. They are when they say, I think they're going to win the game, then they're basically saying, I think Arsenal are a 51% chance or more of winning this game. And that means like zero to a sports bettor. There's a massive difference between 51% and 54%. And you're not going to get that from a broadcast. I still think I don't know what you think. I still think it's valuable to listen to pundits, especially if they're like entrenched in a team, or they watch all their games, all that kind of stuff. The reason I don't really listen much to Gary, because I just feel like he doesn't watch all of the Arsenal games, so I'm not going to respect his opinion. I mean, his famous one was when Arsenal were recruiting at the start of last season, he said something like, I don't understand what their recruitment strategy is, when we'd recruited like 5 players under the age of 24 for minimal, a minimal price. Like, you could tell we were rebuilding. It was just so clear exactly what Arsenal were doing. But he's like, I don't understand what they're trying to do. It's like, it's pretty fucking obvious what they're trying to do. Just like it's obvious.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, if we go back, because we kind of discussed this before we started, I would say most Arsenal fans, to be in the position they're in now, at the start of the season, would have been quite happy.
No, I agree with that.
No one would have necessarily predicted it. So, for example, let's say it's kind of what Gary Neville was saying. It probably wasn't necessarily just him. I think maybe there would have been a lot of other pundits. Some would have been positive on Arsenal, but maybe the prevailing thinking would have.
Yeah, I'm also meant like, I don't care whether he says he thinks the recruitment strategy is good or bad, or whether the players are good or bad. I meant just the actual strategy was pretty obvious. Like, they were just recruiting younger players who they saw potentially one day they could, be a 50, $100 million player. But now they're getting them cheaper, and hopefully that this will start the rebuild kind of thing. It wasn't. He never said anything about, like, whether the Tomiyasu was going to be a good player, or Ramsdale was going to be. I mean, I would have told you Ramsdale was overpriced at the time, but like, it was more so the fact that he couldn't understand what Arsenal were doing. I was like, mate, it is so clear what they're trying to do here.
But let's say they are in second place. But let's say, for example, they were hovering fifth or sixth right now. Then looking back at what he said, you can kind of retrofit it to say, okay, well, yeah, this kind of fit what he was saying here. But again, based on previous evidence, right? And this kind of goes back to the book in terms of, like, I think one of the points he was, we were saying again about open-mindedness and being open to changing your opinion on certain things. So what would happen is people have a sort of prevailing idea of a team, and let's say, listen, I'm a Spurs fan, so we have this tag of being Spursy all the time. But going back to this Arsenal tag, recent times at least, sort of the latter period of, like, Wenger's reign onwards, Arsenal have had a reputation of kind of bottling it, maybe not having, like, enough mentally tough players, and this is kind of stuck. This label kind of sticks with teams until you're kind of proven otherwise. And even with teams where it goes the other way, someone like Chelsea, kind of maybe have got this reputation through the years of just kind of grinding their way to titles, to victories, to cups. Doesn't matter who's in charge, and they're at an interesting turning point right now. But because we have this kind of bias about certain teams, that can kind of filter through in our thinking about, okay, well, this is what they've always been, but what kind of team are they now? And so sometimes the prices and the betting markets won't reflect, like, the current level of that team, and what they're capable of doing. So, I'll throw in maybe a tip. Let's see if it comes true this week. But Napoli and Frankfurt are playing this week. Napoli are flying high in Serie A. Eintracht, they're having a good season. But I think Napoli are still value, like, they're above even, something like 2.2, I think, at the time of this going out and recording, to win in Frankfurt. And I think Frankfurt, again, there's a bias because they're the Europa League champions, and then the market's kind of putting that in. The commentary is going to be about that, about making sure that they're not underestimated. And these kind of things kind of creep in all the time, this kind of sort of previous information. But the real question, something from the book, to consider, and how to kind of improve your thinking about analyzing markets, is when there is new information, kind of how to factor that in, and how much of that information is useful, how much of it is irrelevant, and again, how much weighting should you put, depending on what the source of that information is, on your decisions. Because I think a lot of people find it difficult to, or they see it as a negative, as a kind of a weakness to change your mind on certain things. And I think the most important thing, anyone listening to this with their sports betting, is to actually be open to changing your mind, revising your opinion.
Yeah.
Something you can't be fixed in the same way. Obviously, don't kind of, there's a balance. You can't be kind of flip-flopping and constantly changing your mind, but you do need to sort of factor in if something's happened. Again, if you think a team's going to win, but then all of a sudden their star player gets injured a day before, you're quick to that news. You need to factor that in. If there's a change in lineups, if you see a press conference from a manager hinting at a different formation or tactic or something, all these things you do need to be aware of. You can't be kind of fixed in your opinion from the very beginning of your process to the end if things have changed in between. So I think that's also quite an important point from the book.
Yeah. I reckon there's almost an edge in, like, just always going against the narrative of what's being, put out in the media at the time. Like, imagine if on the weekend like, I guess most people would have had you believe that Man City were going to absolutely smash Nottingham Forest. They're on this, like, amazing run, whatever. But if you actually go back and look at Man City's results, like, before that Arsenal game, they're not really like, they're not setting the world alight at that time. They go and, beat Arsenal fair and square. I think they ended up maybe beating Arsenal by 0.5 xg or something like that. So, I mean, they 100% deserved to win the game, but it wasn't like they completely went to Arsenal and battered them. And then, and then this narrative, starts to create, and all of a sudden now people are saying like us. I think 538 have Arsenal as the predicted, or as the favourites to win the Premier League this season now. So it's just like, it's amazing how, like, if you've just got to always stay open-minded with all this kind of stuff. And that's kind of the next topic we were going to talk about, which is well, let's just skip to the third one, embedding open-mindedness. And I think this is kind of a really hard thing to do, and I think it'll take a lot of time for sports bettors to do this, because you kind of just need to create a habit around being open-minded, and whatever your process is with handicapping, whatever you're doing in sports betting, you kind of need to practice at this and create a habit of being open-minded, because you can, let's just say you have 6 months to a year of successful betting on a certain market sport, you can get lazy, like kind of an example with punditry or whatever. You can get lazy and think that you're on such a roll that and you kind of, I guess, forget what gets you to the place you're in. I mean, it's like a classic thing that happens with like MMA fighters, is it's a lot harder to keep the title rather than actually getting there, because once you get there, you become more famous, you make more money, you've achieved your lifelong goal, and you slack off, and that's when the contender comes and takes your title from you, kind of thing. So I guess, a similar kind of thing here. And one of the things that I this is just so fascinating to me, that for all of their predictions, or I guess any like prediction that these guys made in the project, they wrote their reasoning for whatever their percentage is of this event to happen. And they found that there was a correlation between the wording that these forecasters used with making their predictions. I think this is the most fascinating thing from the book. It's just incredible that they found out that forecasters who use terms in their reasoning, like furthermore or moreover, so like kind of trying to really prove their point as to why this is the correct percentage, as to why they're right, they were less successful, or they performed worse than random guesses. So like, if you just had a random guy who was just like, yep, this is going to happen, that's going to happen, no research at all, they performed worse than someone who could have random guessed these events. But on the other hand, you had a group of forecasters who performed better than these, or best in this whole project, were people that used words like although, however, so like almost like forcing themselves in their prediction writing or reasoning to write words of both sides of the argument. Whereas the guys or girls that didn't do as well, who performed worse than random guesses, were ones that were like, this is why I'm right, furthermore, moreover, this kind of language. So a great example here, if you are looking at Arsenal versus Leicester City this weekend, and you're trying to find an edge and you're writing down your thoughts on the game, try and just like force yourself to I guess, embedding this open-mindedness to use different terminology. It's amazing how like a different use of words to start a sentence can like affect someone's ability to predict an event.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I think it's something I use in my own process, and I need to do more of it. But let's say, when I'm researching a prop bet, I always start with okay, at first glance, I like this bet, I like this this line, it looks like value, but what are the things that could potentially lose this bet? What are the kind of factors in the game state? Let's say I have a bet on the player's passes, so I'll immediately look at, okay, what are the things that could go wrong? What am I missing here? Because again, when you're looking for value, sometimes the value looks so good that you might be missing something altogether. that the bookies might know. So kind of breaking down that process and thinking of all the ways that you could be wrong, although it's kind of a strange way to do it and it could put you off a lot of bets. But once you kind of get into that process, it's fine, because at the end of the day, you're gambling. You're not, I mean, unless you're going for 1.01 shots, there's always going to be an element of risk that it's not going to happen. But what you want to do is, and what's helpful for me is kind of making that list of the pros and the cons and thinking, okay, here are the reasons why it might happen, and here is the reason why it's more likely to happen than the market is thinking. What are the things that they're ignoring? And then here are the things where actually maybe the market's thinking this might happen. Could it happen? How likely is it? And then you'd kind of, you can go off into a deep dive and really kind of drill down into detail. And it is a really interesting point. Again, it's kind of like, because the more kind of sure and confident you feel and you haven't factored those things in, it's kind of easy to go down that route. Lots of tipsters, it's very rare that I would see a tipster post. I mean, they'll post, there's lots of tipsters who post up very well written analyses, detailed reasoning for their bets, but it's very rare that I see a tipster actually say, however, XYZ might happen. This is why the bet's 4-1, for example, because this might happen. So it's actually quite unusual. So if you do actually come across tipsters who put the potential question marks over their own bets, that's actually, I would say, kind of a sign that there is some kind of sophisticated thinking going on there. Not necessarily that people who don't think about that, but it's interesting if you do come across write-ups that have that. It shows the kind of level, of thinking behind, what they're trying to do. I think it's a really, really important way to try and analyze how you're going to go about trying to beat the market.
Yeah, and I guess on to follow on, I guess the next topic is like trying to prove yourself wrong. So yeah, exactly what you just said there, and I like what they said about like how scientists are kind of like, they always have to answer the question to like prove, they always have to prove against their hypothesis essentially, and that's what you should be doing as a sports bettor, just always trying to convince yourself that you're wrong. Because like, I think my biggest, probably the biggest reason I've lost money from sports betting over the last couple of years is probably, not that I'm saying I've lost overall, I just mean times that I've lost my bets, is that my like, when you're so far away, like let's just say an English Premier League game, because it's like basically one of the most efficient betting markets in the world. If I think Arsenal should be 1.8 and they're 2.1, like I am missing something. There is something I have not factored into my 1.8. There's a reason they're at 2.1. Like, you just would never. My edge would probably be more respectable if I thought Arsenal should be like 1.8, sorry, and the odds were at 1.95. Then I'm probably factoring in most things. Yeah, it's still a pretty big edge, but at least my number's a lot closer. So nowadays, if I'm like really far away from what I think the odds should be on like a UFC fight, is I just stay away, because I'm just like, I'm clearly missing something here that everyone else is seeing that I'm not, or I work to try and prove myself wrong. I go and, I try and listen to others and what their thoughts are on a fight. I talk to people that I respect in the industry too. So yeah, I don't know. Do you have any other ways that you try and, I guess, prove yourself wrong, or at least have times where your odds are so far away from what the market is?
Yeah, absolutely. It happens. It happens a fair bit, especially on the props. And I think, okay, something's up here, and often sort of discuss things with with Paul, Jarnell, a few others. Again, like, for example, a bet I'm kind of considering on the Madrid Liverpool game. Passes bet as an example. I'm thinking this particular player, like, the line is too high. It's definitely an unders play. And I looked at the data. I looked at the averages, kind of compared, let's say home and away, how Liverpool kind of shape up against Madrid, how many sort of passes the central midfielders generally tend to get. Looked at this particular player, thought, okay, he's a potential sub risk as well. Everything looked really strong, and then kind of threw it into our little group to say that, what do you guys think about it? And then I'd completely neglected the fact that there's a couple of players out injured for Madrid, which might mean that this player moves into a slightly deeper role, which is going to increase their passes. So this is just like one concrete example, but that again, that's kind of like a simple factor in the reasoning that I hadn't actually, I suppose, computed into the line. But I'd imagine that is, that's why it was priced the way it is. So I'm kind of still hesitant, still thinking about it. I still think there's potential value there, but far less than on sort of first glance. And I think that's where you kind of have to think, what am I missing here? What is the market telling me? And especially if you see kind of lines go against you. So a good thing is sometimes you don't have to necessarily pull the trigger on these kind of bets. If you see something and it seems too good to be true, again, maybe, one way of doing it is putting a small stake so you have some interest and you kind of test it. So you don't feel like you're going to kick yourself if it does actually win. Well, you will think you'll understaked anyway, but or just kind of monitoring these kind of things and just kind of keeping a note of, okay, well, what's the price when I saw it? If you can, try and spot the price, at closing as well, to see has it moved in the direction you wanted it to. So do other people think, are they kind of following what your reasoning is too? Yeah, there's lots of ways to kind of go through that process, definitely.
Yeah, a good example was maybe this is more important in individual sports, so like tennis, MMA, these kind of things. Was is the effect of like I guess how much one variable can really swing things. So let's just say, Man United versus Arsenal this weekend. Thomas Partey goes down with an injury. Pretty key, very important, but there is other players that can come in. It's an 11-person game. Like the effect of that is not as big on let's just say, an example from last year, which was a UFC bet that I placed. It was Dillashaw versus Sterling, and Dillashaw had a shoulder injury coming into the fight, and like that is way more important than one player for Arsenal not being able to play, who ends up getting replaced anyway. Yeah, sure, he's a key piece, but and it was just bewildering to me because he was at 2.5, and just about every person I'd talked to thought that it should be basically a 50-50 fight. If not, would have Dillashaw as favourite. And, comes into the fight and dislocates his shoulder within 30 seconds. And you just, the whole time, you're like, why is this odds not coming in? Like, it's just so bizarre. Like, in terms of my normal process, like, I would think that if all these people that I respect are all backing Dillashaw, that the odds are going to come in eventually, and they never came in, and that was probably why, is that someone out there knew that he had a dislocate or had an issue with his shoulder, and Sterling's true odds should have probably been like $1.05, and here's me just lumping onto a $2.50 on the other shot, on the other side. Sorry, so yeah, just another example of even if you have like ticked off every box and you're like, I still can't figure out why this guy's not favourite, or why he's not shorter than what he is. That there's also this thing called inside news. Like you don't know these people, you don't know, like, there are people that get team news on Premier League teams 15 minutes before, like, these kinds of things. So you don't know everything. You know, to a certain extent, obviously, but like you don't actually know everything all the time. So another example why people that frustrate me when they say bet max or bet more than 2% of your bankroll on something, bet the house on something, like, you do not know. I can give you. I would love to just one day write out all the examples of why you should never bet the house on something, or why you should never bet more than 2% of your bankroll on something. I could give you a million reasons why, of like a guy could come in and snap his leg in 5 seconds, and it's like so yeah, these are kind of the reasonings why. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, overall, I guess we've given a few examples there of why people should, or at least ways that people can try and prove themselves wrong, and embed open-mindedness into their handicapping. Last one, mate. Teamwork, and I think this probably is. I think this is I think the biggest takeaway I got from this book, and I guess ways that people can improve their handicapping, because I think it encompasses almost like everything we've talked about already. Like if you're working in a team, you are almost forced to see the other side of the argument. You're forced to, I guess, be open-minded, because you are, hearing various opinions from various different people. As long as it's, a good team, a respectable team of people that actually, have valuable opinions on whatever sport you're trying to handicap. So I think, example from the book is that they said after 1 year, so they basically had certain people were working in teams and certain people were just working individually, and it showed that after 1 year of the project, results showed that teams of forecasters outperformed individuals by 23% on average, so it's quite a big margin. And then for the second year, so for that first year, those teams were just randomly selected, just got a bunch of people together, whether they're good forecasters or not, put them together, and they outperformed individuals by 23%. And then the second year, they got super forecasters together. So the best of the best from the first year, they got them all together and created super teams, I guess you could call them, and put them in a group together. So the best of the best. And then they outperformed, they improved exactly by 50% or more on their individual scores on the year before. So basically showing that you put a group of people together, they'll outperform an individual. But if you put a very, very good group together, the best of the best, they outperform themselves as individuals by 50%. So kind of shows the value of working in a team environment.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think this part of the book I did find interesting, but also had lots of kind of questions about, I think, in practice, how you apply this. Because I think, on the surface, it's, to have a team of people working together, it makes a lot of sense, like in, so many domains that you're going to kind of improve results. But I think it's important to think about the characteristics of that team. So, do you want, I mean, obviously, like on the podcast, you've had lots of sort of betting duos and partnerships, who've come on, and they've kind of shared how one person brings something to the table, the other, brings different things. I think that's quite important as well, that you kind of, you want to, because if you're kind of doing the same thing, thinking the same way, constantly coming to a consensus, then actually it's not really adding that much value. But then if you have, occasional kind of dissenting opinions, sort of healthy, constructive sort of disagreements on things, I think it's actually very good, because you're kind of, again, having to kind of justify your position. So you can have one person basically telling you, what, picking holes in, your, let's say potential bets, your angles, thinking of things you haven't thought of, or again, it's kind of approaching things in a very different way. And I think that's quite useful to kind of combine that together. And again, it's a kind of a division of labor as well. It's hard, if it's just kind of one person to keep track of all that information. So even in the Good Judgment project, like what they found, I think earlier, was the news junkies, and again, like, let's say people who were regularly checking, for updates on like world events, and some of their predictions that they were looking at, were generally, again, kind of performing better. So if there's a team of you who are able to kind of look at different strands of information and data, and bring that all together, then that's again like a huge strength, a massive strength to have. I think they mentioned as well, didn't they, that they had teams where they added, let's say, they kind of put one super forecaster in there into the mix, so it was kind of like a team of again randoms, but they kind of put one person in there as a super forecaster, and even that kind of significantly improved the accuracy of predictions. But they also kind of mentioned, I think, sort of some limitations of that study. I think some of it was done, let's say, remotely. I think that was kind of more, I suppose, more challenging in terms of having everyone, let's say, physically together in the same room. Again, kind of just kind of bouncing ideas off each other in real time, can often lead to lots of kind of eureka moments. So that was quite useful as well. But yeah, definitely, I think, like, obviously with yourself, like with your UFC, you have people you talk to about it, you share ideas with, you kind of bounce. It's just kind of doing it purely by yourself. I think anything in the betting world, people can do it, and it is possible, but it is harder. And I think there's very few people that I know who at least don't, let's say, consult with other people, or kind of share ideas with every now and again, or at the very least they'll have people that they respect, or with knowledge on, let's say, the sports they're betting on, and they'll kind of look to see what they're doing. So even again with myself, there'll be particular people, tipsters, other people, and in groups I'm in and contacts where if I see them doing something similar to what I'm thinking, or if I posted something in my group and I've tipped something up, generally because there's a few groups who are kind of more popular than mine, so I try to get ahead of them because the prices just kind of cave in, and it's kind of too late for me to do anything about it. So what's great is sometimes if I post something and I see that two other groups that are quite profitable and they're quite sharp, and if they posted the same bet, it's a really strong reassurance for me that that's someone's looked at it in that same way. So yeah, it's a fine balance, I think, because especially in betting, it's an important point to make as well, because you see a lot of people, the standard kind of thing that people say is like, well, if you have an edge, why are you going to give away your edge? Why are you going to sort of tell anyone about it? And it's like every professional sports bettor should just live in a cave and like just not speak to anyone, not share anything. I don't think you can really operate like that, with the way things are now. Or you're basically you're handicapping yourself by limiting what you can do. I mean, you might not have to share everything, but to have a kind of team where you can bounce those ideas off, I think is really important, really valuable. So
Yeah.
a lot of people listening to this here, maybe they're starting this journey out on their own, but if you're listening to something like this, obviously you're a gambler of of good taste, and podcasts like this, or reading books like Superforecasting, improving your knowledge, and then asking questions to people about that, and you can kind of build sort of partnerships of sorts just through that. The amount of contacts kind of let's say I've made through this. I mean, it's not as big as your black book of contacts, but you find sometimes you can kind of unexpected places where you have conversation with someone, and actually you have a kind of partnership of sorts. You share information about different things. They'll give you kind of an idea on a strategy, or they'll have skills that you don't have. Especially for me, like there's lots of people who are kind of very numerate. I've got kind of Excel and coding skills, and kind of can put the ideas I have in my head into practice, or they have little angles that they'll share with me because I've shared things with them. So it's kind of a two-way process as well.
No, really well said, mate. I think like I say this all the time on the podcast, but potentially that like networking, once you get to a certain level, is, I think, maybe the most important part of sports betting, because there's so many different elements to it. There's what we just talked about with getting the opinions of someone who's betting the same sport or league or whatever, and then factoring that into your odds or handicapping, and then there's like getting accounts, getting information, all this stuff. Like if you can It must be like quite daunting for someone who's maybe just starting out today or recently in their sports betting, because you essentially start with nothing. Like it's pretty rare that I don't know any of my friends that are sharp sports bettors. I don't have any. I've got the complete opposite. So like when you're starting, you're normally starting from scratch with no one sharp to bounce ideas off. So it is quite daunting, but I think you outlined some great methods there. Like get involved in there's so many like Slack channels, Discords, Telegram groups. It's amazing how like so many people are really keen on, because it's a pretty isolating job. It's amazing how many people want to talk and share their ideas on something. So that's a good way to start. Get involved on Twitter. There's obviously going to be a lot of nonsense, a lot of noise out there, but you can, if you put in the time, you'll be able to sift through that noise and really yeah, I guess get a hold of the people that are sharp, and you can maybe start up a little private group of your own of just getting a couple of the guys that you really found were interesting or whatever, and it just starts from there. And I think you just mentioned it there. Like I think most sports bettors, professional ones, they're isolated, and I think they're a lot of the time they're happy to reply to DMs, even though you might see someone with like 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 followers on Twitter. Like, oh, this guy's famous. He's never going to reply to my messages, that kind of stuff. Like, I think you'll be surprised by the people out there that are willing to help, because they were at the exact same stage at one time in their life when it came to sports betting. And you just never know. It's worth a punt, I think, to try and build these connections and just keep learning. Stay. I think the more humble you can stay, and not think of yourself as a genius on a certain sport or league. Think that your edge is so good that you can't talk to people about it or share it. Maybe not share it, but like I think you're missing out in so many different ways, whether that be getting accounts, different opinions, staying sane from being isolated. Like there's so many different benefits from working with other people or just having like a little chat on the side. So yeah, good stuff, mate. Anything else you want to talk about that, or should we move on?
No, yeah, I think we covered it quite nicely. Yeah.
Is there anything I've kind of gone through most of my points? The only other thing I have written down is just practice and repetition, because it's just like you're not gonna be able to embed all these things into your handicapping straight away. Like you need to practice it, and it's like anything in life. So I think that's kind of a boring topic to talk about, but is there anything from the book that you wanted to talk about before we call it a day?
There are a couple of things. I'll try and be sort of brief, but there was one lovely analogy from the book about the fox and the hedgehog, and basically, what kind of thinker you want to be. Kind of, if anyone's reading sort of the Daniel Kahneman book, The Art of Thinking Fast and Slow. You have kind of two personality archetypes. So if you imagine a fox and a hedgehog, and basically kind of how they are. So a hedgehog is quite entrenched in their thinking, resistant to kind of change, and their environment. They kind of curl up on a ball, don't they? So no one attacks them. And then the fox, I mean, it's like foxes around me, like West London. They're agile, they're adept, they can kind of live anywhere. They're living out here in like the suburbs, feeding off scraps, and quite kind of what's the word? They're good problem solvers. They can kind of like adapt to different environments, but they're also, again, because they incorporate change quite well. So you kind of have to consider yourself, are you one of those two? We kind of talked about it already, but I just thought it was a really nice visual analogy of like,
I like
what
that.
kind of thinker you want to be. The other thing was about Fermi thinking. Again, from a kind of I believe it was an Italian thinker. Basically, how you look at problems. So breaking down your problem from a global to a granular level, and also looking at things from the outside rather than the inside. So kind of, to maybe explain that a bit further. Again, so I think a really good point that was made in the book was about what a lot of people do is they'll look at a problem and try to directly answer that question: Are Arsenal going to win the Premier League? But what you really should do is kind of say, look at the problem from the outside, right, and look at, right, what's going to stop them winning the league? What potential roadblocks are there going to be? What kind of hurdles are there going to be ahead of them? And again, it's kind of not necessarily dependent just on them. What's going on with the other teams they're going to play. So rather than just focus on, okay, are Arsenal going to do this? Is Gabriel Jesus going to score lots of goals? Or is Zinchenko going to get lots of man of the match performances? That is part of the thinking. But really, you to get an accurate read on what's going to happen, you need to look outside of that box, if that makes sense. So yeah, those are a couple of sort of quite interesting points made here. And one other thing I wanted to sort of just say again was about risk aversion. It was kind of mentioned in the book as well. Essentially kind of playing it safe. I think this really relates to sports betting, kind of stuck in my head, especially at the moment, because there's, again, let's say, tipsters been kind of promoting their service at the moment, and they do well. They're very knowledgeable, but generally, what they're sort of tipping up are very kind of short odds selections on horses. So, but still, horses at around kind of evens, which is a very different approach to what I take with mine. But it's quite a popular option with punters, and let's say sort of something like I do. My group is maybe. It works. Let's say I'm 150 points up since May, but at the same time, because of the volume, it doesn't suit everyone. Because of the big odds, people don't like it. People like low risk. People like a steady high strike rate. But my belief is that you're not actually going to make as much profit that way, and you need to mentally attune yourself to take more calculated risk. I think I'm sure this has been kind of discussed many times in the podcast already, but it's really important in relation to this book. Again, the forecasters who weren't afraid to again kind of assign a prediction on something that may perhaps was unlikely, because I think the way they scored the Good Judgment Project was kind of, there was on a graded scale, wasn't it? So if you were obviously if you were completely correct, then you would get certain score. If some aspects of what you predicted had happened, you'd get some points. If you were totally way off, you'd get a kind of negative score. But that also kind of, it's important to think how people were kind of doing this, and maybe the super forecasters are also not gaming the system, but kind of again because the project was about making lots of predictions rather than individually getting each one right. So basically, and it's very much like high volume plus EV betting, that way you are looking at lots and lots of different events, and you're going to get some wrong. You might get 10 in a row wrong, but if you're doing 1,000 of them and your process is sound, then again you're going to get a good score overall. And I think that's where maybe some of the non super forecasters let's say weren't taking that risk in their thinking. I think that's really, really important to me anyway. Obviously there's different ranges. Some people will just never want to bet at high odds, and that's fine. It's just, it doesn't suit your profile. But at the same time, you do have to open yourself up to at least taking some chances, because in my opinion that's where, especially in the betting markets, especially on things like horses and golf, that's where you tend to find more value further down the market. The markets are kind of front loaded towards favorites in a lot of sports. So I think trying to adjust your thinking in that sense is quite useful, and it's kind of evidence in the book. There's examples of it as well.
Yeah, no, it's well said, mate. And I think there's a reason why in certain sports, like you mentioned, golf and horse racing, the ROI is not even, if you're sharp, is like if you compare the sharpest soccer bettor or EPL. I mean, EPL is kind of a shit example because it's like literally the most efficient market in the world, but let's just say you're a sharp Australian football, Australian Soccer League bettor. Let's compare the sharpest on that league in terms of like 1x2 Asian handicap over under markets, maybe not prop markets because then it gets a bit murky, but compare that to like an each way better on the horses or the golf. The sharpest of both worlds, the ROI is really not comparable. Like there's no debate as to who's going to make more money in the long term. Maybe because there's more volume on the soccer or whatever, that maybe, but probably not. Like if you just compare like bet for bet, the ROI is just it's not comparable in terms of what you can do. But I mean, it's a beautiful thing, mate. That's why we can continue to make more money. I'd rather people, keep betting these other, leagues where the ROI is much shorter, just because they're going to, I guess, get less variance in their betting. But I think, yeah, like you said, it's a thing that sports bettors should all think about. But most sports bettors think about tomorrow. They think about today. They think about this week. They don't think about 6 months, a month, a year in advance. And I hope most sports bettors continue to think that way, because it helps us out. Otherwise, there'll be nothing left in the horse racing golf market.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, because I get this question. I get asked. I've been asked a few times. Sort of what's my what can from members or people thinking about joining my service. What's your kind of monthly target? Like what's your kind of monthly profit target? What's your average profit? And I say it's kind of, I can tell you what it has been, but it's going to be meaningless to tell you what this month is going to be or what next month is going to be. I don't look at things that way. But I think that's a difficult concept for, let's say, a lot of people who are aspiring to do it, because you can't. First of all, you create a rod for your own back and a kind of pressure to hit a target that's kind of arbitrary. And then the other thing is, if you're looking at things week to week, month to month, I would look at it at an annual level. How have I done over the past year? And maybe that's kind of partly slightly laziness in terms of sort of constantly tracking everything all the time, but also I think it helps your mental process to again, kind of, at least for me, just to kind of focus on the bets themselves and follow the process and just think, is this value? Is this not? Everything we've talked about today, like about trying to prove yourself wrong, talk yourself out of a bet, but if you're still confident of your selection, just still go for it. And then the results, the profits kind of take care of themselves if you've got the kind of the right process in place.
Yeah. Love it, mate. I think we've covered quite a lot today, mate. I think if you are someone looking to start handicapping a sport, or originating, or in any capacity, coming up with your own odds on a game, modeling, whatever method you want to use, I think there's something in this for all those kind of people to take away. And I guess probably our biggest recommendation probably be to read the book. I think, oh, he's got it. There we go.
Got it ready,
mate. So yeah, I would highly recommend to read the book, or you can just listen to this and take out what we thought were the most relatable things to sports betting. But yeah, anything else, mate, or should we call it?
No, I think it'd be just really good if anyone who's listened to this could actually sort of put a comment in if you've read the book, what you think about it, if there's other takeaways we haven't talked about, which it's one of those books where let's say I've read it sort of not cover to cover, but kind of in different sections a couple of times. I think it's something I'm going to go back to. I think that you get books like this sometimes where you can't really take in everything it's kind of trying to say on first read. It's not a hard book to read necessarily. I think it's quite sort of for the kind of topic it is, it's not that dry. There's some good examples, there's some interesting things, but the kind of messages it's kind of telling you, I think that is quite dense to take away from just one reading. So you might have to kind of go back a few times, have a look at different strategies. And definitely, like Alex has said, what I do as well with books like this is just, again, get a highlighter, make some notes, just highlight some interesting passages, really kind of read it in that sense to see what kind of stands out for you. Because I'm sure other people who comment, while watching this will have different takes on it or interesting things that we haven't covered today, for sure.
Yeah, no, I love it, mate. You can find Neil on Twitter at MyBetterLife and myself, Alex, at AlexVella _ mate. Anything exciting coming at the moment? How's the group's going? Well, maybe you want to do a little promo for the group here on where people can get involved.
Yeah, sure. So so I have a tipping group. So we cover horse racing, football, and golf. So it's kind of fairly busy, fairly active, nice little community we have there. And there may be plans afoot to kind of separate those out. So if you kind of only interested in football or golf or horse racing, and maybe don't have time to do all three, that could be an option coming up very soon. So you can find me on Twitter or on Telegram. It's the same. My Better Life. Send me a message if there's something you might be interested in, and
Love that, mate. Little teaser, renovations in the future.
Absolutely.
It's adapting. I like it, mate. Keeping that open-mindedness.
It's actually a fox, not a hedgehog.
That's what we can call the podcast. Be a fox. All right, good stuff, mate. Thanks everyone for listening. If this is your first time on the podcast, do a rate and review. It would be superb. Give us a comment on YouTube and do all that good stuff. Like, subscribe. And if you are looking to implement some of the strategies we talked about today on the podcast, more so the value betting ones, start a free week trial of Trademate Sports. Mate, it's been great to catch up once again. And I'm sure we'll be back on soon, mate, with something else that we want to talk
Any
about
suggestions
now.
for the next book? If to make us read, it's a good motivation for us as well. So any ideas on the next book? Well, we call it a review, but kind of book summary.
I did start reading that Thinking Fast and Slow book recently. It's pretty tough though. It's very
it's not the easiest.
It's not. It's very tough, mate. So that's going to probably take me about another year, I reckon. I've already started skipping through certain sections, but so we'll see how much we can get out of that one. But yeah, maybe one on that sometime soon.
Good stuff. Yeah, we can do like the crib notes.
Yeah, exactly. All right, see you guys. Cheers.